The book we call the Holy Bible is still one of the most widely read and distributed pieces of literature in the English language. But what exactly is the Bible, and how should we understand its contents? I'm Pastor Chris White, and that is my assignment over the course of this series, What You Should Know About the Bible. In the last few installments, we've been looking at the doctrine of canonicity. In theological terms, this answers a specific question: which books should be included in the Holy Bible as inspired texts? Further, it answers another question: why were some texts excluded? In this episode, we'll continue with the history of the New Testament canon and specifically look at the process of recognition that it went through. If I could sum up this process, it would be less a what and more of a who. The biggest shaping factor of the canon is the communitas fidelum, or the community of the faithful. In John chapter 10, verse 4, Jesus talks about himself as the Good Shepherd and says that his sheep recognize his voice and will not follow another. His people have a spiritual sense about this voice. It is what Jesus would call having ears to hear. Well, time has a way of sifting out everything, and such is the case with the New Testament. The simple reality is that the canonical books were accepted and used in the church because the people of God recognize the voice of God speaking to them. To tease this out a little bit, there were books at the time that were immensely popular, such as the Didache and the Shepherd of Hermas, that were sometimes used in the church, but they were never serious contenders for inclusion in the Scripture. With the community of the faithful, there's also been a providential history. While no single document exists that describes this history, we know of a few important guidestones. First, there were affirming councils. These were periodic gatherings of the churches and their leaders to discuss matters of doctrine. Two notable councils were that of Laodicea in 363 AD. In their rulings, they list the entire New Testament in a different order, but containing all the books we consider canonical. There was also the Synod of Hippo and Carthage in 393 and 397 AD, respectively. Each synod lists the New Testament as we know it and in the order we know it. This literally fixed the canon of the New Testament Scripture as we know it, and no group has ever attempted or even made a case for altering the shape of the New Testament. In addition to the councils, there were also affirming leaders in the church. One of those leaders was Athanasius of Alexandria. After the Council of Nicaea in 325, it was given to the Bishop of Alexandria the task of setting the date for Easter every year for the entire church. Bishop Athanasius, a key leader in the East, would write what he called his annual festal letter, which set the date for Easter, and then would include other doctrinal or pastoral concerns he felt would benefit church leaders under his leadership. In his 38th festal letter, he delineated the current contents of the Old and New Testaments as the only books that are inspired and to be taught in the churches. In 400 AD, Jerome was commissioned by the Pope to make a new translation of the Bible into Latin, as Greek was dying out in the western part of the Roman Empire. Jerome's final translation looked like our Bible, with the exception that he added the Apocrypha at the end of the Old Testament as an appendix. This confirms that there was universal agreement in the church on the canon of the New Testament. Another important person is Eusebius. After Luke, Eusebius is the second most important historian in the Christian church. He was a scholar, a bishop, and served as a priest to the Emperor Constantine. At the end of Constantine's life in the 340s, he commissioned Eusebius to have made 50 copies of all the scriptures for the churches in Constantinople. The copies were to be of the Old Testament and New Testament as we know it. Just a side note, a popular historic distortion is that Constantine dictated and edited the canon at the Council of Nicaea. This didn't happen. In fact, it was not even a consideration at the time. Constantine did affect our New Testament in one way, and that's the inclusion of Revelation. In the Western Empire, Revelation was always received, but in the East it was disputed by many because it was so weird. Constantine loved it and used phrases from it in his speeches all the time. The upshot is, Eusebius wasn't so stupid as to produce Bibles at Constantine's expense without Revelation included. But his inclusion paved the way for grudging acceptance in the East. To this day, the Eastern Orthodox consider Revelation canonical, but do not include it in their liturgical readings. Having looked at affirming councils and leaders, in our next installment we'll continue our look at the development of the New Testament canon, exploring some of the criteria that was likely used in measuring each book. I hope you'll come back. Until then, this is Chris White. Thanks for watching.